you, Simon, and thanks everybody. Yeah, so I'm John, and I'm from that's my Twitter handle if you feel like doing that kind of thing. Experience, errors and structure. This is a topic and a sentence that I wrote in an email to Catherine when she was organising World IA Day back in October, and it's one of those classic things of, hey John, can I have a synopsis please of your talk? And I said, well, it's kind of like this. And what it dawned on me after I'd written it was actually what it was as a kind of a synthesis of a way of thinking that I've been formulating over my career. So I'm now kind of 11 or 12 years into my career, and various things have happened that have affected the way I approach a design project and think about things such as information architecture. So this morning I want to just do a little bit of, take you on a bit of a personal journey for me and show you the way I think about things and the way that I think others can approach certain topics within UX. So there's going to be 3 parts. Surprisingly, you'll be stunned to hear that the 3 parts are going to be experience, errors and structure. So experience, I want to take a moment to think about the word itself and the connotations that experience naturally brings with it. Obviously, the phrase UX has been bandied around an awful lot in the last few years for people such as myself. You know, I was there before we were necessarily calling it UX. But what I find fascinating is the addition of experience to many of our job titles, I believe, carries with it many connotations. This is an experience. This is probably a pretty bloody amazing experience, if I'm really honest. This is not my bag. My wife would regularly jump out of an airplane. But, you know, this is, you know, you buy experience days for loved ones on their birthdays and so on and so forth. Some people associate this kind of thing when they hear the word experience. And it's very positive. It's like, wow, that was awesome. We spend a big proportion of our time designing things like this, for this. And I guess what I want to talk about, what I want to challenge a little bit today is the positive connotations that come with the phrase experience. Because actually, a lot of the time, we are designing something like this, we're not jumping out of airplanes. But when I look on Twitter and I see the way that the community is talking and things like that, often I feel like that they believe they can honestly create experiences like this. I don't believe for 1 minute I've ever made a product where anybody was sat at home in bed going, whoo, that DVLA application, whoa, that rocked my world. So this is not what I mean by experience, and I was debating this with a good friend and a colleague of mine, Alice, in the pub after some usability testing last week. And he said something to me very profound that I really resonated with me, and feel free to debate it with me. But he said this thing. He said, what we're doing is doing the experience, not an experience. So when people approach us with a digital question mark, you know, here's project X, here's a brief from a client, or whatever it may be, I want to move away from the super positive connotations if we're going to give everyone some kind of digital orgasm, and move back to the idea that we will make the best experience possible for the problem that we are faced with. Almost like everything should be the experience and no more. I'm a big fanboy of this guy. Have people heard of Scott Jensen, ex-Apple, ex-Frog? Okay, very clever man. And what I want to take a moment to talk about is the way that he has spoken in the past about user experience. And he has a very simple model that I've always loved, and he calls it the UX golden rule. And effectively, what he's really talking about is that users will engage with something, they will use something, if the value they obtain from it outweighs the pain which they feel. So a nice example of this he always talks about is early SMS messaging. You know, at the time, SMS was seen with the early mobile phone creators as a bolt-on feature. You know, the idea that users might actually go along and press the number 9 4 times to get a Z, and then if they press it 5 times, they've got to press it 3 more times to go through. That kind of concept, they thought, no one will ever do that. And yet SMS became the behemoth of messaging that it later became. Why? Because the inherent value of being able to drop a very small message and wait, you know, before we had email on our phones and everything like that, massively outweighed the pain of trying to write. So if you think about user experience under Scott's way of thinking, what we're saying is actually there's two sides to the coin. So there's value and there's pain. And as long as value outweighs pain, then we're going to be probably moving towards a good experience. This is what I want to challenge a little bit is the idea that we should necessarily start from the I'm jumping out of an aeroplane view, because in my opinion, this is my personal view, we can't have those amazing peak experiences that we may want our customers to have until we've got our laundry in order, until we've removed the pain. Errors. Errors, in my opinion, are the manifestation of pain in the system. If we are witnessing people making mistakes using something that we've designed, then naturally, that to me is the manifestation of pain. If we're seeing a lot of mistakes, then you know, our weighting is wrong. They make us stumble or stop as we move through an experience. But what I find fascinating about errors is that they're predictable. There's a whole industry that exists that has been studying human error since about the late 1940s. And one of my things I'm always preaching to my team and to others within the UX community is although we all come together from very broad and diverse backgrounds, there is a plethora of research and work that has been done over the years that helps us understand human behaviour and how people make mistakes. Human beings fail in predictable ways. So, sorry, I should just say that industry I'm talking about was the early formation of ergonomics, human factors, user-centered design, HCI, whatever you want to call it. You know, we were designing interfaces for spaceships and jet planes and many things like that. The key thing I want to just talk about for a moment here is that I want to disassociate a human being making a mistake with something because of a bad design. You know, we're not playing the blame game here. If a human error manifests itself when we're watching someone use a system, you know, the first thing I want to be clear of is we're not going on a witch hunt, you know. That's the newspaper's job to accuse someone of accidentally blowing up the oil refinery. You know, when I would argue it's bad design. And the reason I'm talking like this is because of the way that I started my career. As I said, I'm classically trained, human factors, ergonomics background originally, HCI, etc. And for the first 5 years of my career, I spent much of my time going back and forth between oil refineries, nuclear power plants, control rooms for train stations, etc. If any of you ever go between Bristol and London, all of that network is controlled by an interface that I designed. The point was, one of the best things I ever learned very, very early in my career was one day, this isn't the chap I was working with, I couldn't find a photo, but let's just imagine that I've flown all the way up to Grangemouth, where they have one of the largest refineries in the UK, and my job is to work with a chap called Angus. Now Angus is 6'8" in all directions, and I mean all directions. And he looks at me, and he's got an enormous spanner, and he's covered in oil, and I'm 23 years old, and I step off the aeroplane, and I've got a checklist. I'm here to make your system better, Angus, and I've been to university, and I know everything. And Angus looks me up and down, and he just says, "What the effing hell do you know about chemical engineering?" And I thought, it's not a point. I'm not trained in chemical engineering. I'm trained in the analysis of user behaviour of systems and how to spot human error within it. And that was exactly what I said to him instantaneously back. He said, "You are the expert in chemical engineering. I'm the expert in user-centered design and behaviour." I said, together, we can resolve the problems and the situations that you are having. And this is a really pertinent point to me when we talk about experience and as experienced designers. Because if you think of the plethora of work that we all may work on, whether we're in-house or an agency or a freelancer, what we're really talking about here is we are specialists in the field of user-centered web design. I will never be an expert in... I may work on a project for a breast cancer charity one day. I'm working on a job for a major financial institution the next. So my point here is when I look at what the UX community is doing online, we're kind of ignoring our heritage. We're forgetting the good work that has been done previously to help us tackle many of these design problems. And what I want to do is us to remember that when we say experience, the connotations that come with it are naturally positive. But when we think of today's theme as architecting happiness in World IA Day, one way of looking at it, with Scott Jensen's hat on, would be, in order for there to be a happy outcome, we have to remove the pain. So that's why I'm flipping on its head, I'm afraid, for my talk. And I'm going to be talking about errors. I've already talked to you about a range of a big, rich history of studying how people make mistakes. I'm not going to cover that in a half-hour talk today at the World IA Day today. And there's no need to get that academic, to be honest with you, in most of the design challenges that we will work on. But what I do want to do is this is a framework that I use in my head to when I address and critique designs. What do we mean by human error? Well, in this context, what I mean by it for today is everything from the smallest mistake made by a user at an interface level. You know, maybe they've accidentally activated a hidden piece of content whilst they're playing with the tablet, or they've got some dodgy form put in problem, through to, you know, errors where, you know, I just gave up, I dropped out of the system, I stopped using the digital product and transitioned into another channel. I decided to call the building society instead of going through their website or something like that. And just to echo what I said before, human error to me is a manifestation. So if we're seeing human errors, it's because the system is resulting in that. But when I'm talking about human error today, I'm talking about that breadth of kind of error that someone could make. And I'm broadly putting them into two camps. Interface errors. Didn't see something. Struggle with an interaction. Frustrating form inputs is one example. You know, accidentally activating something. This was a classic one when we all first started playing with you know, the iPad when it came out. The amount of UXers that I've been meeting who will say strange things to me, and with such as, which has happened to me in a meeting last year when I was chatting to a UXer on a client-side event. They said to me, John, audience type Y don't like accordions. Let's think about that for a minute. An entire section of society have abject objections to a component. All people from Sweden do not like the colour green. It's crazy. Yes, we talk about the audience groups that we're doing in user experience, but actually, when you're talking at the interface error level, they're errors, in my opinion, that any human being could make. This is a nice example I saw on Twitter this week from BBC. A gentleman was tweeting about he was really, really struggling to understand what the current temperature was today. He couldn't know whether it was 8 degrees or 3. And that's not because he's an accountant, and accountants always have problems in trying to identify what the temperature is of the day. The mistake he's making is at the interface. So hopefully I've banged my drum a bit about this, but I think from the way we're approaching designs, I think this distinction is important. Because these kind of mistakes, in my experience, they tend to be smaller. They're irritants. You know, we see a lot of stuff tweeted and people talking about, hey, there's some great UX there, because of, you know, what we call a micro-interaction or a failure of somebody making a mistake, or I couldn't decide whether the switch was on or off. My point here is to use an analogy, I believe that those kind of frustrations, those interaction interface errors, are like the small dinosaurs from the Lost World, where one-on-one, you can probably take it, you know. But when they come at you like 50,000 at a time, they're going to win. Yeah? And the pain, it's the small little bits of pain, but the pain gets too high. So let's think about the opposite then. What's the second type of error I'd like to talk about? What I call understanding errors. Simon hinted at this about meaning and things, and I'm not sure if this is the best way to describe it, but you could call it a contextual error. But fundamentally, a person making a decision, making a mistake in their use of the digital system that we're designing, where they fundamentally don't intrinsically understand something. You know, the classic information architecture mistake of the wrong language is used on the site. You know, they don't have the required level of knowledge to do what it is that we're asking them to do. You know, this has got nothing to do with an interface element. This is fundamentally understanding of the user in a self-serve context, which is one of the biggest problems of the web, obviously. and that nobody from the organisations that we work for is sat next to a user telling them how to do it. So, you know, the system operates in a different model to what the user expects. You know, an orientation error. They fundamentally do not know where they are in the system. And these top two, I often like to call, am I in Kate Moss's house? Because what I'm really talking about here is, Kate Moss is a model. This is a terrible analogy, but Tim, I remember it. Kate Moss is a model, and that's the model that I may have in my head. And then, am I in her house? Am I orientated correctly? Do I understand how the system works? And do I understand where I am? If I don't, we've got an understanding error. As I said, my bottom point here, they're often contextual in nature. And these ones are the ones that I tend to feel are quite related to audience types. And hopefully you see through the talk, this is why I'm questioning about where we do our research efforts. Unfortunately, I can't show you the design work. But I would like to talk to you about a big project that we worked on last year around helping a major financial institution help novice audiences. And I think the important thing here is when I said novice audiences, that's actually the first time I've referred to an individual user group. Novice investors take smaller sums of money, £5,000, £10,000, they've been left something in a will, and invest it in the stock market. What I'm trying to get at here is you've got a massive understanding error risk. How does the stock market work? Here's your ISA, but your ISA is your tax-free wrapper, and then when you take your ISA, you put it in your fund. Where's my fund? Your fund is everywhere. Your fund is in oil sands in Canada, and your fund is in some kind of East Asian diamond mine. And okay, great, so where's my money gone? Yeah? I won't labour the point, but talking about UX mistakes at an interface level is meaningless in this context. Another major project that we worked on was the Student Loans Company, and this is one of my favourite user experience problems I've ever seen. And it fundamentally manifested itself in two ways. One, an understanding error, and one, an interface error made by the design team. When you're 16 years old and you're about to go to university, on many occasions, you haven't actually had much engagement with financial institutions before. On a personal level, I opened my first bank account when I went to university. Most of the jobs I did in my youth were cash in hand. Didn't have a need for a bank account. Maybe that's changed now, I don't know. But the point I'm making is the first time we were asking students to try and get themselves into enormous sums of debt was the first time they'd ever used a system like that. What model did they have to relate to? Nothing. The mistakes were horrific. My best example here of where the designers of the system were failing to recognise the context and the understanding that the students needed was that they didn't emphasise the fact that when you apply for a student loan from the UK government, we need to know household income. Because we need to know, depending what mum and dad or guardians or nan and granddad, whoever you live with, whatever they earn, are you eligible for a grant? Or is it a loan? Have you ever asked a 16-year-old kid what mum and dad are? Does anybody here know what their parents earned when they were growing up?
No, I know.
So not only are we asking the wrong person in the system the wrong question, but they were filling it in wrong. I had a girl in the test lab who, mother was a GP and whose father was a director of a law firm. And she honestly believed they earned less than £27,000 a year and she was eligible for a grant. So she made the application and lo and behold, 2 days before she goes to university, it's rejected. Happy user experience. I think you get the kind of mistakes that I'm talking about here. They're endemic within the design of the systems, but they fundamentally result in human errors manifesting themselves in quite serious ways. So, if interface level errors are the tiny dinosaurs, I expect you know where I'm getting with this. Understanding errors are what I like to call a big fucking problem. They're the kind of problems that come along and eat our users in one go. They kill the experience dead. both types of error are important. I'm not belittling one over the other. However, it is errors of understanding that typically result in the killer blows from our experiences, whereas those little interface ones tend to be that death of 1,000 cuts. So, a good UX person, in my opinion, if they think in this way, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to present it today, is that I do have this going on in the back of my mind when I sit down with our design teams when I'm critiquing something that they've done. Can have the ability to control, mitigate, or eliminate them. And I'm going to come back to that bottom expression at the end of the talk. So structure. So to recap, if we think about the way that Scott Jensen thinks about experience, then what we're saying is that experience is potentially a two-sided coin. It has value, and you have pain. If we could argue, and I always like to argue this, that it's the content itself within the products that we're designing that the users are looking for, right? It's the value. Why have I logged on to a big media website provider? Not necessarily because I want to know that they have amazing broadband, but more than likely I want to know if they've got Game of Thrones. So if that's the case, then finding the content is what causes me the pain. This is not a new thought within many spheres of UX. It's something that I think has been lost on occasion. And if we think of errors, understanding errors, the big ones, manifest themselves in some kind of mental model disconnect, some kind of orientation error, some kind of lack of knowledge, or we've introduced foreign concepts in the wrong order. We've asked the kid how much mum and dad. So, structure is the root cause of many of the largest UX problems that we face. So, what discipline in the web deals with structure? It's World Information Architecture. So, when I'm wearing my information architect hat, I acknowledge that micro-interactions and the design, the detail of some areas of products we build are important. But I look at them a bit like this. You see, they're kind of those little dinosaurs, whereas when I wear my information architecture hat, I'm going T-Rex hunting. I'm going to stop, right? I'll be honest, I didn't have a slide for this. And I was in a business meeting all day yesterday, so I said to one of our design team, can you make me a slide? And when I came back at 6 o'clock, he was going home for the evening, and he'd done this, and I thought, okay, it's an interesting interpretation of what I was going for. Then it told me he photoshopped my face on Napoleon, and then I thought, well, blimey, that's the most arrogant slide I've ever put. So, yeah, my wife hated it as well when I put it above the bed this morning. I hope you get my point, is that the big problems, I think, are fundamentally coming from poor structure. So what does this mean for research? I used the phrase control, mitigate, or eliminate before, and I've taken that literally from the world of health and safety in which I originally started my career. When we had a major risk, airplane falling out of the sky, oil rig blowing up, if we spotted it, we had to approach it in one of three ways. Can we control it? Can we ring fence it? Can we take that risk and put it somewhere? Because we can't fundamentally get rid of it. Can we mitigate it? Okay, there's some stuff we can do. We can change some of the design, we can move things around, but actually there's always going to be a bit of that risk. Can we eliminate it? My favourite. You think there's a problem with the guy playing with the acid tap that might mix with the other chemical that's going to explode? Great, well, why don't we just get rid of the tap? Good idea, John. This kind of thinking is, again, what I have, and I was trying to present a framework this morning, that I have in the back of my head when we're critiquing design work. You know, we're often spotting systemic errors, you know, if we're looking at user flows or user journeys, whatever it may be. Can we control the risk, mitigate it, or eliminate it? And it's a little checklist that I like to run through. Our research efforts should be more to the exploration of understanding errors, in my opinion. At the moment, lean, agile, yeah, they're all good things, right? We work in that way very, very often. But what I see in my comments about people who've been tweeting various things is a lot of people starting to move into that optimization space, which are only, in my opinion, tackling those interface errors we were talking about at the start of this talk. So my question as an IA is, what have we already designed for T-Rex in? That agile, iterative optimization piece is going to be hard to hunt the T-Rex. Terrible analogy, sorry. Just to bring myself to near the end, really. If we think about interface errors, many of those I believe we can mitigate with UXD best practice. And, research methods, yes, but understanding what it is that we're trying to eliminate. Yeah? We've designed very, very nice forms as an industry. Yeah? So when I see people say things like, user group X don't like accordions, or people from Sweden hate the colour green, we're thinking in the wrong way. Understanding errors, that's the gold as an information architect. That's that qualitative deep dive UX research pieces. The models, the systems. This is what information architecture was always historically about. So hopefully what I just want to talk about is that's kind of the personal view really of the way that I kind of visualize and approach some design efforts. If we talk about experience, then the way I like to think about it is that if we're going to architect a happy experience, we need to remember that there is pain that must be eliminated first. If we're witnessing errors in our digital designs, they in themselves are the manifestation of the poor design, and we should be able to spot them, because human error is predictable, particularly at an interface level. And finally, I think that affects the way that we structure our research efforts and the plans and our objectives around what we're trying to learn. So, bringing it back to the theme of architecting happiness, one way that you could consider it